All right, good evening, guys. We're going to do your Northern Renaissance notes. This is behind the Italian Renaissance notes that we did for the first Flip Classroom video, the packet of notes. So, Northern Renaissance still falls in the category of the Renaissance. We're still talking about the Renaissance as a whole, but we really focused our first discussions on the Italian Renaissance. All right, so, an overview of the Northern Renaissance. It begins a little bit later, roughly 100 years after the Italian Renaissance, for one major reason, because of the Black Plague. Now, cities like Paris in France and London in England are very affected by the plague because there's so many people living in such close quarters. So there's going to be a slow recovery because of the Black Plague. So a lot of these ideas, innovations, philosophy, art, it's going to happen a little bit later. So in the north, right, north of Italy, we're talking about countries like Germany, the Netherlands, England, France, right, that region of Central Europe. The printing press is going to be heavily influential in the Northern Renaissance, and we talked about the spread of ideas. The Bible is going to be extremely important. I know we've mentioned kind of the Renaissance values, the Bible being more medieval, but they're going to use it to kind of question the church during the Reformation. And we're also going to see a growth of the middle class. Job specialization is occurring. There's going to be people owning more land. Trade is going to increase, and the middle class is going to grow and really thrive. So this is the region, again, Florence is the main Italian city-state that we're talking about. And again, they're happening all over Italy. And these ideas are spreading north to this area of Central Europe, Germany, Belgium, right, parts of England. You can see these major countries and major cities, London, Paris. So we're going to start to see these Renaissance values kind of take their roots. So similarly, how we talked about the Italian Renaissance artists, there are Northern Renaissance artists as well. The probably most influential is Albrecht Dürer. He's a German artist, and oftentimes he's referred to as the German Leonardo, right? He almost looks like him in a way. This is a self-portrait, one of his famous works. You can always tell a Dürer painting or engraving by his initials here, AD. He also is famous for his woodcuts and engravings. We're going to look at these pictures and images in a second. But he was actually in communication with Italian Renaissance artists, about their artwork. But a very talented artist. Some of the works, Praying Hands, Young Hare, and St. Jerome in His Study, all very detailed. St. Jerome in His Study is one of those wood carvings where he's engraving it. Young Hare, really, really detailed. Again, and Praying Hands, I'm sure you've seen images of this. Sometimes they'll have, a crossover, more of a modern day interpretation, but all Albrecht Dürer's paintings during the Northern Renaissance. Another Northern Renaissance artist is Jan van Eyck, who is a painter from Flanders, which is basically modern day Belgium, in this area of the world here. And Jan van Eyck is another famous Northern Renaissance artist, uses oil paintings for rich colors. His most famous work is called the Arnolfini portrait, and we're going to look at it in class, and I'll talk about that. Here is the image here, but we will talk about this in class. One of the more famous Northern Renaissance art of the time. So the printing press I mentioned, obviously we've been talking about for a while. Spread of ideas, increased literacy. It's going to increase the supply of books. It's going to be cheaper, more efficient, right? Better for most people. And eventually, like I mentioned, the Gutenberg Bible we'll talk about. Martin Luther is going to spread his ideas about Protestantism, using the printing press. Here's just a couple maps to show you how spread out the printing press became. Gutenberg here develops it in Germany, and again, he modernizes it and brings it to Europe. It's a Korean invention. in 1450. And if we look here, 1480, 30 years later, these are cities that have printing. And then by 1500, only 50 years later, it's basically spread like wildfire all around Europe. So from 1450 to 1500, all of these cities now have printing or some type of printing press where these ideas are spreading. And we look, there's a cluster in this area of the world here, right, in the Italian city-states and in the northern, right, we have two clusters, right. Here we have England with London, and then these Italian city-states are, northern of Florence. So all major areas of Europe now have printing. Two writers of the Italian Renaissance, or actually four. Machiavelli, who we talked about in class, argued for human nature being inherently bad for the most part, and that rulers should look to become as feared as possible in the work The Prince, which we read in class. Erasmus, another humanist and writer of the Renaissance, he is going to take Greek and Latin text and use it, right, to make kind of these Renaissance values in his writing. Really important humanist, and we're going to read a little bit of his work a little bit later. So two writers of the Renaissance, really the Northern Renaissance as well. Machiavelli is actually Italian, but we're kind of grouping them together here. Two more. Shakespeare, the most famous playwright in the world. Number one, because you are probably reading some of his work in English with Miss Blaney or with Miss Lynch. So, for that reason, he is, so important. He actually develops a lot of words, which you can ask your English teachers about, but a very, very important writer in English history. And then Thomas More, an English writer, author, and humanist. He writes about a utopia, or this ideal political nation, where less crime exists. Everything's more of a perfect, right? It's very ideal. And we will read a little bit of Thomas More in the future. So that's it for Northern Renaissance. If you have any questions, of course, email me and then fill out your note sheets with the notes. Thank you.